5 women, 1 killer, no arrests. No convictions. His name, Jack the Ripper. For over 130 years, the world has chased shadows through the alleys of Whitechapel. Tonight, we stop chasing. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Just search for The Michael Braa Show on Insta, Facebook, YouTube, or the KC CBS 47 Plus app. I'm Michael Braa. This is The Michael Braa Show. And what you're about to see isn't another retelling of the Ripper myth. We're using tools the original investigators never had: modern forensics, open source intelligence, psychological profiling, and of course AI modeling to rebuild this case from the inside out. Not speculation, not hearsay, but data, evidence, and a suspect the police always suspected but never convicted. We've mapped every crime, traced every escape route, re-examined every suspect, and at the end of it, we're going to show you what the evidence actually says. No royal plots, no secret societies, just one man. Let's begin. Let's break it down. 5 murders, all in just over 2 months, all within a 1-mile radius of Whitechapel. 5 women: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Indow, and Mary Jane Kelly. They really weren't society's concern. They were poor, alcohol dependent, living night to night in lodging houses or sleeping in alleys. Most sold sex just to afford a place to sleep. And in 1888 London, that made them invisible. But someone saw them, someone watched them, and then quietly killed them. Violently, methodically. Mary Ann Nichols was found on Bucks Row, August 31st. Her throat was cut twice, deep. Her abdomen was slashed open, but no organs were missing. This was the beginning. 1 week later, Annie Chapman was killed in a backyard on Hanbury Street. Same throat slashing, but this time her uterus was removed and taken from the scene. Then came the double event. September 30th, Elizabeth Stride was attacked first. Her throat cut, but no mutilation. Police believed the killer was interrupted. He fled before he could do what he came to do. But less than an hour later, Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square. Her face slashed, her abdomen gutted, her kidney and most of her uterus were missing. But the final murder was different. Mary Jane Kelly, November 9th, killed indoors in her own tiny room in Miller Court. No one interrupted him. He took his time. Her body was found in pieces, every organ removed, her face obliterated, her heart gone. This was not random. This was escalation. Each murder showed more confidence, more control, more rage. He killed with precision. The evidence showed he likely choked his victims first, just enough to silence them, and cut their throats cleanly, from left to right. In several cases, there was almost no blood splatter. The mutilation came after death, always after. And every murder happened on a weekend, late night or early morning. That's not the pattern of a madman roaming blindly through the fog. That's a man with a routine, with rhythm, with purpose. And look at the geography. These weren't random points across the city. He hunted in a tight circle. He knew the alleys, the shadows, and exactly how long he had before someone came around the corner. This wasn't an outsider. This was somebody who belonged there. Someone who lived among the same desperation as his victims, who used it to disappear. And that tells us something critical about how he moved, how he chose, and who he really was. So let's build that profile piece by piece, starting right now. Now that we've mapped the crimes, let's map the mind behind them. The term serial killer didn't exist in 1888. Investigators lacked our modern tools: criminal profiling, forensic psychology, geographic analysis. But we have those tools now. So let's start with the crime scenes. Each attack was sudden and silent. No screams, no defensive wounds. He didn't just overpower his victims, he controlled them, quickly, expertly. This wasn't medical skill. Today's experts agree that the mutilations show no real surgical training. But he had practical knowledge. Perhaps he was familiar with slaughterhouses or animal butchery. He was used to blood, death, and knives. The progression is telling. With Nichols, he was tentative. By Chapman, he took trophies. By Eddowes, he was confident enough to strike twice in one night. And with Mary Kelly, he was unleashing, committing horrific violence behind closed doors. He wasn't deteriorating mentally, he was escalating emotionally. He was fulfilling a deep-seated fantasy, and that each killing, that fantasy became more intense, more violent, more specific. Experts today call this type of offender a lust killer, not driven by traditional sexual assault, but by domination and destruction. His violence was gratification. And he chose women society had discarded, poor, vulnerable, overlooked. He saw them clearly not as people, but as prey. He despised them, yet he needed them. And every killing was a message. He was in control. He killed locally, consistently in the same small area. Modern geographic profiling tells us clearly this was his comfort zone, his anchor point. Probably lived there, certainly felt safe there. His timing is also crucial. All 5 murders occurred late night or early morning, on weekends. That's not random. It suggests someone with weekday commitments, maybe regular work, maybe living arrangements that limited his freedoms. He hunted when he could. That's someone who blends in effortlessly, someone neighbors don't question and police overlook. Not an aristocrat, not a visiting stranger, local, invisible because he belonged. So let's put the pieces together clearly. A local man from Whitechapel, likely late 20s or early 30s, comfortable around violence, knives, and blood. Deep anger towards women, particularly vulnerable prostitutes. Employed or occupied during the week, free to hunt on weekends. Blended effortlessly into his environment. That's the profile, built from facts, behavior, geography, and modern investigative science. So this part isn't guesswork, and this isn't theory. This is data. Now it's time to match that profile to the actual suspects. Because in 1888, the police had names. They had theories, they just couldn't prove it. But tonight, using everything we know, we can. So let's meet our suspects.
Trust. It's hard to get and easy to lose. When the risk of loss is great and people are hurting, who do you trust? How about the people trusted by the biggest names in business, agriculture, and government? Atlanta's Private Investigations, building trust one case at a time.
I'm Michael, founder of Atlanta's Private Investigations. Let's talk. When you need help, your answers are here. Let's talk suspects. Because in 1888, the police had plenty. And tonight, we have the tools to revisit each, examine the evidence, and finally narrow the field. We'll start with the men whose names you may have heard, names tied to this case for well over a century. We'll measure each against the facts one by one. First, Montague Druitt, an English barrister who committed suicide shortly after the final murder. He was once a leading suspect because his death coincided neatly with the killing's endings. But here's the issue. Druitt had no clear connection to Whitechapel. He lived miles away, had commitments in distant towns, and modern research places him out of the area during key murders. He also showed no signs of violence or hatred towards women. Druitt was troubled, yes, but likely innocent of these crimes. Next, Francis Tumblety, an American traveling doctor who fled England abruptly after being arrested, not for murder, but for unrelated charges. Tumblety was known for his hatred of women and bragged openly about collecting uteruses preserved in jars. A chilling detail. He was flamboyant, noticeable, older than the man witnesses described. Could he slip unnoticed through Whitechapel streets, repeatedly evading capture? Modern profilers think it's unlikely. Suspicious, sure, but not quite our man. Then we have Walter Sickler, the painter famously accused in recent decades. Sickert's connections rest on provocative artwork, a fascination with crime, and some questionable DNA evidence linked to letters widely considered hoaxes. The truth is, Sickert wasn't even in London for most of the murders. No contemporary investigation mentioned this. Sickert makes for sensational storytelling, but he simply doesn't fit the hard evidence. That brings us to George Chapman. His real name, Soren Klosowski, a Polish barber living right in Whitechapel in 1888. Chapman went on to poison 3 women years later, earning a place in criminal history as a serial killer. Inspector Frederick Aberline once himself said, "You've got Jack the Ripper at last," after Chapman's capture. But again, here's the problem. Chapman poisoned his victims quietly, carefully, without violence or mutilation. And could a savage street killer suddenly become a subtle domestic poisoner? Criminologists say probably not. A brutal, frenzied attacker rarely changes to stealthy poisoning. Chapman was dangerous, but probably not our Ripper. And finally, Aaron Kosminski, a name long whispered among investigators, a name hidden in police memoirs and marginal notes. Kosminski was a Polish Jewish immigrant, a barber, young, mid-20s at the time, living steps away from the murders. He was mentally unstable and later institutionalized with severe schizophrenia. And he was identified by a witness, according to the very men who ran the case in 1888. But the witness refused to testify against a fellow Jew, and Kosminski was quietly placed under watch, never prosecuted, and eventually confined to an asylum. The murders stopped after 1888, not immediately, but Kosminski was increasingly monitored until permanently institutionalized. He was invisible, troubled, known to police, and perfectly matched our geographic profile. His name wasn't headline news, but it was quietly known to detectives on the ground. So where does this leave us? Druitt, wrong place, wrong profile. Tumblety, flashy but improbable. Sickert, artistic license, no substance. Chapman, violent, yes, but the wrong kind. Kosminski, local, invisible, psychologically troubled, and possibly directly identified. 5 suspects, 4 eliminated, 1 remains. Let's follow the trail, one final time to see if Aaron Kosminski truly fits the puzzle. Let's put him at the crime scenes on the nights in question and see what happens, because we might have our man. Aaron Kosminski. His name barely registered in public in 1888, but privately, within the quarters of Scotland Yard, it echoed for decades. Tonight, let's look closely at Aaron Kosminski, the evidence, the geography, and the timeline, and see exactly why the original investigators believed he was Jack the Ripper. Kosminski was 23 years old in 1888. He lived with his siblings on Greenfield Street in the very heart of the Ripper's killing zone, just minutes from each murder site. He was a barber by trade, familiar with razors and knives, but he wasn't professionally trained in medicine or surgery. This matches exactly what modern forensic experts say about the mutilations: practical skill, not surgical expertise. Kosminski also matches the killer's psychological profile. By 1888, he was already showing clear signs of severe mental illness, what we now recognize as paranoid schizophrenia. His family described him as withdrawn, volatile, and troubled. He had violent outbursts, threatened his sister with a knife, and was increasingly isolated and paranoid. This fits precisely with the profile of a killer whose attacks escalated in brutality. A man unraveling, driven by internal chaos and deep-seated anger towards women. Now let's consider the timeline. The murders were swift, silent, and occurred late at night or early in the morning or on weekends. Kosminski's personal situation allowed him that freedom. No steady employment, no strict supervision at night. He had the opportunity and the means to roam Whitechapel freely, unnoticed and unquestioned. After the double murder on September 30th, police tightened patrols dramatically, and notably, following Mary Kelly's murder on November 9th, the killings stopped. Why? Because from late 1888 onwards, Kosminski's mental state deteriorated sharply. His family increasingly watched him closely. By 1891, he was institutionalized permanently, described as hearing voices, refusing food, utterly consumed by his paranoia. And there's something else. Sir Robert Anderson, head of Scotland Yard's Criminal Investigation Department at the time, wrote explicitly they identified Jack the Ripper, a Polish Jew specifically named Kosminski, who was positively identified by an eyewitness. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson personally noted the name Kosminski in the margins of Anderson's memoirs, confirming this identification. But he also explained why Kosminski was never charged. The witness was also Jewish and refused to testify against one of his own, leaving police unable to prosecute. Again, this isn't modern speculation. This is documented history from the highest levels of Scotland Yard itself. So why is Aaron Kosminski not a household name? Well, simple, there was no trial. There was no dramatic capture and no public unveiling, just quiet surveillance, a confidential identification, and eventual confinement to an asylum. But tonight we've pieced it all together. Clearly, the geography fits, the timeline fits, the psychology fits, and crucially, the direct identification by a credible witness. Aaron Kosminski was the man police suspected. Tonight we see why. There is no secret society, no royal conspiracy. Just a troubled man who slipped through history's fingers. And finally we know his name. But before we close this case, let's give a last word to the women who lost their lives because they deserve to be remembered clearly, truthfully, and respectfully.
Welcome to Kara's Corner. Today, I'm going to shift the spotlight from the killer to the ones who mattered the most, the victims. Here, we go beyond the headlines and the shock value and the blood and the gore and ask the real question. Why this person? Why this moment? And what signs were missed? Every victim teaches us something about patterns, about predators, and about prevention. Let's talk victimology. Let's learn, remember, and fight for a future where there are fewer stories like these to tell. If we want fewer victims, then we need to stop focusing on the killer and start learning from the case. Stick around. This is how we fight back, with facts, insights, and a whole lot of hard truth. Jack the Ripper didn't just kill 5 women, he selected them. They were all over 40, poor, sick, and often drunk. They were living in the worst parts of East London, sleeping in common lodging houses, alone. He didn't pick young, healthy women with families waiting at home. He picked targets who couldn't defend themselves, and they had no one waiting for them, and no one to check on them. That tells us something important about his psychology. He avoided confrontation. He had control issues. He needed submission, and he chose situations that he could control from the beginning to the end. That's what organized offenders do. They look for low-risk, high-access targets, and then they escalate over time. His attacks became more violent, more calculated, more drawn out. He didn't sexually assault them, but he targeted reproductive organs, the uterus, the kidneys, and eventually the heart. There was no sexual activity in any of these cases. That kind of mutilation isn't random, it's symbolic. It points to resentment, maybe fixation, but not lust. In profiling, victim selection tells you what the killer fears, what they want, and what they can't handle. Jack hunted women who couldn't fight back. He needed control and quiet, and this pattern still exists today. Victimology shows us how and what needs to change to stop it from happening again. We remember the mystery, but forget the message. When society treats some lives as disposable, predators take note. I'm Kara, and this has been Kara's Corner. Stay aware, stay loud, and most of all, stay dangerous to the people who count on you to stay quiet. I'll see you next time.
We've heard from Kara about the lives impacted by these horrific crimes. Now let's turn to Mia, our investigative AI assistant, for one final analysis of the Jack the Ripper case. Mia has meticulously reviewed thousands of pages of historical documents, the police archives, and forensic reports. Tonight, she's also considered what modern investigative technology would tell us if these crimes had happened today. Here's Mia.
My review of thousands of historical documents, police archives, and forensic reports has highlighted 3 key investigative advances that, if available in 1888, would quickly confirm or eliminate Aaron Kosminski as the prime suspect. First, DNA analysis. In the original Ripper investigation, forensic science was virtually non-existent. Today, we routinely collect DNA from victims' clothing, murder weapons, and even items touched by the suspect. A DNA analysis attempted in 2014 used a shawl associated with victim Catherine Eddowes, reportedly linking it to Aaron Kosminski's maternal lineage. Although that study has faced criticism due to potential contamination, modern forensic methods would quickly resolve these issues. Advanced DNA techniques would provide clear, definitive answers, confirming guilt or ruling it out completely. Second, digital geographic profiling. Modern investigators use sophisticated geographic information systems, or GIS, to accurately map and analyze crime scenes. These tools pinpoint the offender's likely home or base of operations with exceptional precision. Applying today's digital geographic profiling methods to the Whitechapel murders repeatedly identifies the killer's probable residence near Flower and Dean Street, exactly where Kosminski was living at the time. With current technology, investigators would swiftly zero in on this area, conducting targeted searches immediately, not weeks or months later. Third, behavioral and digital footprint analysis. Law enforcement today relies heavily on artificial intelligence to detect patterns of behavior and psychological risk indicators. While social media didn't exist in the Victorian era, modern equivalents, such as deep community analysis, digital surveillance, and psychological profiling algorithms, would rapidly identify high-risk individuals. These AI-driven systems would quickly highlight Kosminski's escalating violent behaviors, severe mental deterioration, and his proximity to the crime scenes, flagging him early and decisively as a prime suspect. Together, these investigative tools, advanced DNA testing, geographic profiling, and AI-powered behavioral analysis, create overwhelming investigative certainty. The historical ambiguity that allowed Kosminski to escape prosecution and perpetuated over a century of speculation would no longer exist. If the Whitechapel murders happened today, Aaron Kosminski would be rapidly confirmed or conclusively ruled out. In 1888, investigators identified Kosminski through eyewitness testimony, but without these technologies, he remained legally untouchable. Today, the outcome would be starkly different. The killer would have nowhere left to hide, and the truth would be swift, certain, and undeniable.
Tonight, we've shown how modern investigative tools could have changed the story of Jack the Ripper, turning historical uncertainty into forensic clarity. But that clarity comes at a price. Think about the serial killers of recent history: David Berkowitz, the son of Sam; Ted Bundy, or Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. Modern science stripped away their mystery. DNA, fingerprints, and digital evidence left little room for doubt or folklore. We knew quickly who they were, how they did it, and often why. Jack the Ripper remains different, an enduring mystery over 130 years old. With no fingerprints, no DNA tests, no CCTV footage, the case was left wide open, and into that openness our imagination stepped forward. What we lose in certainty we gain in storytelling, folklore, and myth. Jack the Ripper became more than a killer. He became a character, a dark figure at the heart of countless novels, movies, and legends. Our lack of certainty gave birth to endless fascination. Technology solves cases, protects us, and gives victims and their families answers, but it also closes doors. When the answers are known, the imagination goes quiet. Jack the Ripper never gave us certainty, and perhaps that's why we're still here, telling his story, reimagining and speculating. He's the shadow that technology can't quite erase, the darkness we still fill with curiosity, fear, and storytelling. We solve crimes faster today, but sometimes in the quiet moments, we might also miss the mysteries we can no longer tell, the stories we once imagined. I'm Michael Braa. Thanks for joining us tonight. Goodbye.